Welcome back to the library. Today, we had a wandering traveler visit the library and we got to talking, and eventually we stumbled our way into a discussion on our top 5 characters from Golarion history. With that said, I hope you enjoyed this little chat between history buffs. Also, before we get into the video, my Discord is doing a collaborative effort to flesh out the Midnight Torch, the faction that Sir Vertigo is a member of. We're voting on the guild crest for the faction right now, and you can have your say in it if you join within the next week or so. We're also fleshing out anything else a faction you need, such as choice of deity, ranks, and etc. So feel free to join in and help me finish fleshing this character out.
For my number 5 on my list of my favorite characters from Golarion, I put Arnyx the Whitehair in here. Although he's kind of a stand-in for how Paizo handles orcs in general, because I really like how they have approached orcs as a concept in their setting. Going back in Golarion lore, orcs famously fought alongside the Whispering Tyrant the first time that he was trying to take over the world, if you will. And even though the Whispering Tyrant was defeated, orcs for a long time kind of carried this association with that evil moment in Golarion's history. But then in recent history, the Whispering Tyrant has returned, and the leader of the orcs, Ardax the Whitehair, killed every orc who thought about joining the Whispering Tyrant and united the orc tribes against the Whispering Tyrant.
And so there was a clean break against the Whispering Tyrant when he came back.
Yes. And I absolutely love that. It's very reminiscent for me of the way the orcs are handled in Warcraft 3. At one point they were associated with a very evil faction, but then you have a leader who breaks the orcs away, and they still have a lot of the traits that are classically associated with them, but they've also kind of moved into their own space in the narrative.
With the slaying of Manaroth and all that.
Mm-hmm. I have a feeling somebody at Paizo is a fan of World of Warcraft. I'm not sure who it is over there, but I feel like they took some pointers. But so, you have Ardax the Whitehair kind of leading that breakaway and giving the orcs a chance to have their own story. But then the other thing that makes him an interesting character is he is more of a spy master than a typical orcish warrior-style character. And a lot of the way he has been written, he's a middle-aged orc, which most orcs don't live that long, and he's not as big or burly as some of the orcs might be. But when other nations try to send spies after him, he always catches them because they always underestimate him. And so I think he's just a very fun take on an orcish leader, and I think it makes for a fun twist in the Golarion setting to have him in that role.
Yeah, that's actually really cool. I've not really heard of that character, to be honest. So hearing about the Spy Master Orc, that's actually really interesting. I'm going to have to look into him later.
I was going to say, I just enjoy that the orcs are allowed to be a little more cunning and a little more independent. They're still dangerous and they've still got some of the classical traits, but they're no longer, a lot of orcs are just this big, dumb stereotype of a monster, and they're not being played that way now, and I really enjoy that.
Yeah, I love when they kind of break the mold on characters and kind of expand on races and stuff. So that is really cool to see. Actually, it would be terrifying to see all the orcs become unpredictable like that, though. All right, my number 5 is going to be Robag, the World Eater. I just think, just because of the coalition of gods it took to take him down, I just think that's a cool character. Basically, back before the Age of Creation, he was so powerful that all the gods had to team up and they couldn't even kill him. They had to just defeat him and lock him away inside of Golarion. And I just think that's such a cool concept, because he's in the middle of the planet now, trying to break free, and everybody says that he's the reason volcanoes and earthquakes happen, is him stirring.
Mm-hmm.
We know Asmodeus holds the key to his cell, and it's rumored that one day Asmodeus will release Robag in an attempt to stop an even greater threat, which is basically how the end of the world will come in the Golarion lore so far. And I just think that's really cool. That's such an interesting idea. On top of just being a intensely powerful god, he's spawned some of the most terrifying creatures over the years, including Ulanat, the giant beetle that's in Sothis, the Tarasque, Tarask, whichever one you want to pronounce it as, and Volganar, the winged beast. It's rumored that one's still alive, but I actually couldn't find a lot of information on that one. I'm not sure where it's popped up in lore yet, but just overall a very interesting character to me.
I like Rovagug as sort of the source of some of those great kaiju-esque monsters. I think it's a good way to add that element into the world. And also, what was the first one you mentioned? Ulanat, I think?
Ulanat, yeah.
I always have trouble remembering that name, but like to have this city where like part of their architecture is
built into the creature.
Like the remains of this creature that we had to kill because it broke out.
And
I think that
the cool thing about Ulanat is that some prophets are swearing up and down that this thing's going to get up and come back to life soon. So you've got one of the biggest cities built around the remains of this being that isn't dead, apparently.
Well, if it's anything like the Tarask, it's not going to stay down long.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's terrifying to think about. Imagine that you're walking down the street in your village and all of a sudden part of your city gets up and starts tearing through the rest of the city.
As a game master, I could have so much fun with that moment.
Yeah, for real. And on top of all that, just the events that's happened directly and indirectly because of Robagug are amazing. Like, I wasn't going to really touch on this, but it is interesting, so I'll pop it in here. Sarenrae sent one of her old heralds to the site where they locked Robagug away because people were starting to live there because they misinterpreted her saying, "Do not live here," and instead they built a city on the site of where he was imprisoned. Well, over the centuries of them living there, Robagug had corrupted these people so badly that when Sarenrae's herald came down and tried to gently say, "Hey, y'all need to move," they slaughtered her herald. And she was so angry about it, she drove her sword into the city and accidentally basically damaged Rovagug's cage, allowing him to push the spawn out through this slot in his cave. And if he can do all that through a scratch in his cage, imagine what he would do if he was unleashed.
Yeah, I think Rovagug is a great, end of the world style threat, and I think Paizo did a good job with him.
Oh yeah, he's very interesting, and it's a very looming background kind of threat, but that's always cool to see.
So for my number 4 on this list, it's a character that had to be on the list. When you talk about most influential characters or favorite characters in the Golarion setting, you have to mention Tarvafon, the Whispering Tyrant. You just can't get around it, you know? He is not my favorite villain in the Golarion setting, but he is a top tier villain, and he is for a reason. You know, Tarvafon starts out as this powerful necromancer on the classic quest for power, and, you know, his drive is to become a lich. And I really enjoy the way Paizo approaches the story of becoming a lich in their setting, in that every ritual to become a lich is unique to the individual. Like, that individual has to build their own unique way of going about it. Tarvafon is basically described as the man so arrogant that a god killing him was the only thing fitting enough for him to become that lich.
Yeah, and there's the whole thing with the 2 dragons. I can never think of their names, but he basically took the corpse of black dragons, and it's this is not in lore as far as I'm aware, but it is from one of the Paizo video blogs. They basically mentioned that he used parts of these dragons in his ritual to become the Lich before his death, and that's one of the things that helped him become so powerful. And because of that, now, if I'm not mistaken, he's still got both dragons as undead servants. It's been a while since I've looked into that, so that may have changed now, but at one point he did have these two ancient black dragons as servants.
I will admit I don't know that portion, but I do know his headdress, his hat of evil, if you will, is black dragon horns, so I do know that that is part of it.
Yeah, I'll have to double check, and I'm planning to do a Tarvafon episode soon, so I'll double check all my facts before that, of course. But as of a video blog from, I mean, this was back in like 2012, 2014, so it's probably changed by then, admittedly. But I know at one point that was the deal.
But part of the reason I think Tarvafon is such an excellent character isn't just the, you know, like classic top tier villainy, but I also think Paizo has used the character really well. Like, they teased him beautifully all the way through Pathfinder First Edition. One of their, I think, earliest adventures or adventure paths broke one of the seals to Gallows Spire, and you know, there would just be different hints of him dropped all the way through First Edition. And then when they were ready to do Second Edition, basically the event that transferred us to an entirely new game was him waking up and wrecking the city of Vigil. And I think Paizo has used the character beautifully, and it's a great example of, if you're gonna have that Overlord style villain, this is how it's done.
Yeah, that's a very good point. They didn't shove him down our throats or anything. They used him just the right amount to where he is terrifying. We didn't beat him too many times to where we know he's not a threat. And even at the end of First Edition, when he's defeated, it's literally the biggest fluke that defeats him. So, I mean, it's not even that we can say, oh, well, 5 heroes beat him and he's not a threat anymore. No, he's regenerating even as we speak.
Round 2 will start soon, and it's probably not going to go well.
It's probably not. Alright, my number 4 is Asmodeus, just because I love the scheming devil-type characters. He's the Prince of Hell, Lies, Lord of Darkness, the ruler of Hell itself, and the patron saint of Cheliax. Overall, just, he's one of those characters that he's got a finger in every pie. He's always behind the scenes pulling the strings you didn't even know were being pulled, and I love those kind of mastermind characters. And he is basically the idea of a string pulling character.
I'm glad you mentioned Cheliax, because I think that that's one of the fun things that they do in the Golarion setting, is you have this whole prophecy of the return of Eridan that just falls flat on its face. And then Asmodeus is there like, oh, I can pick up these pieces.
Yeah, exactly. That's the kind of stuff he's really good at. He's that whisper in the darkness when everything goes wrong that people always lean toward. And I always love stories like that. And the idea of Cheliax itself is a cool idea, just because it's not some little backwater town worshiping the devil like you expect. This is a major civilization, an entire nation that just decided, well, our god didn't come back, let's turn to this one. And strangely enough, they've basically flourished because of it. You don't really have any of those typical failures you get from worshiping the devil. You get all of the things he promised, and he gets all the things he promised, and that is such a cool dynamic.
Well, I think overall, the theme of this video can be Paizo has world-class writers.
That's very true. Their characters and their settings are world-class. Like, I've got friends who don't play Pathfinder, and I will text them random bits of lore, and I actually got one of my friends to start playing Pathfinder just because I was telling him about, I believe it was the death of Eridan and the Eye of Abednego that opened up. Basically, he thought that was just such a cool concept that he wanted to try out the game, and he's been playing it for a few years now.
Well, since you had one of the deities for your number 4, I figure I'll bring in my favorite. Well, not my personal favorite deity, but I think the deity that Paizo uses the best for their setting, and that is Nephas, the All-Seeing Eye. He is the Golarion take on the god of magic. His backstory is he was once revered as a god king in the nation of Assyrian, so kind of the ancient Egypt of the Golarion setting. And you've already got a lot of classical plays on historical magical tales in doing that. But essentially, Nephas was this god king who, he was just on a quest to learn as much as he could and to gain as much understanding as possible. And he managed to open his mind to the true possibilities of magic, and in so doing, he went insane. And so now Nephas is actually 2 different personalities crammed into one deity. One of them is this chaotic, destructive entity who is basically the personification of like Fireball and Meteor Swarm and, just everything destructive that magic can do. And then the other half of his personality is this very protective and restorative, which would be like the healing, protecting magic. And so his personality is this constant back and forth between the extremes of what magic is capable of.
Yeah, he's kind of the true definition of neutral, because you never know if he's going to assist you or if he's going to destroy you from moment to moment. He's the definition of most of my RPG players.
Fair enough.
And on top of that, his character art is always amazing. I absolutely adore the way his character looks.
I completely agree with that. Years ago, in a Pathfinder First Edition game, I wasn't using the Golarion setting, but one of the villains I created, I basically just stole Nephas's artwork and his, like, the way Golarion approached that character. I basically just copy and pasted and gave it a new name, and my players loved that villain. It was so awesome.
That's always fun to do. It's a very good sign, though, if a character inspires you enough that you introduce them to a new setting. That shows that Paizo, again, did really good at creating that character.
The reason I wanted to talk about him is this is really the first god of magic in an RPG setting that I have found engaging in terms of their narrative. Like, the typical god of magic is this like very scholarly old person who is just this font of knowledge and not much else. They have the practical command of magic, but they don't personify magic. And Nephas I love because he feels like a personification. Like, what can magic do? Well, here are all of these extremes, and he is trying to contain all of these extremes inside of himself.
I know a little bit about the God of Magic from D&D, and she doesn't really have a lot to do with magic so much as she has a lot to do with healing magic constantly, because they use a whole, there's the weave, and you cast magic by pulling strands of it to you, from what I understand, and she's always re-sewing this weave, so you never really see her do a lot with magic, but that's what Nephas' whole thing is, and that, like you said, is very cool. That's a cool take on a magic god. My number 3 is Sidris Imris, the founder of the Technic League from Numeria. Personally, I love the Numeria nation. I think it's a very interesting setting because you've got barbarians versus robots, and that's kind of my thing, I guess. But Sidra
sounds like something I wrote when I was 9 years old.
Very true, but they fleshed it out very well because there's explanations for everything. Like, okay, well, if you've got all this advanced tech, why isn't it all across Golarion? Well, there's the Technic League that keeps it trapped within Numeria so it doesn't get out. And Sidra, as the founder, she set it up to be this thing where it would just make sure technology didn't hurt people, but secretly She is actually an alien from the spaceship that crashed into Numeria centuries ago. She was kept asleep in a stasis chamber and finally woke and created the Technic League to gain allies so she could eventually get access to an escape pod and return home. That's a cool plotline to me. Like, that's not what you would have expected looking at the fantasy world that is Golarion.
I was excited when you said that you were going to be talking about Sidra, because the little bit I've encountered of the Technic League is like where they show up just a bit in Pathfinder Kingmaker, because I've played that game, but the Technic League is something I've wanted to explore more, so I was excited to hear that you were bringing their founder into this. So.
Okay, so with you not knowing much about her, basically, back in 4501, I believe, she woke up. Well, she started looking through all the wreckage across Numeria and finally found Silver Mount, which was the biggest chunk of ship that had crash landed, but it had a city built around it now. She couldn't directly get into the Silver Mount because that's where the king of Numeria lived, and that's what they guarded. So she created the Technic League to gain allies and power so she could eventually get in there. And right as she was on the cusp of having enough allies and pull with Numeria to be able to get into Silvermount, her second in command assassinated her. So sadly, she never even had a chance to see if there was an escape pod in there. But since her death, the Technic League's twisted and warped, and it's now this controlling puppeteer faction that is basically keeping the king drugged up and controlled, and it's completely twisted from what it once was.
See, I knew the Technic League in kind of that capacity, because like when you bump into them in Kingmaker, they're slavers.
Yeah.
And so like I knew they were drugging the king, and like I've seen the twisted side of the Technic League, but it's kind of nice to know where the Technic League started.
Yeah, when it started, it was all about, oh, well, these androids and robots are starting to slip out of things. We can easily deactivate them, recover their parts, build tech to save people. And now they do the same thing, but they're building tech to enslave people. And it's just become this thing where instead of saving people, they're all about boosting their own power.
Mm-hmm.
And I think since the Ire God adventure, that's probably changed, but I have to admit I've not looked into Numeria post Iron God's adventure path, so I'm not sure what their standing is currently.
I honestly don't know either, but it does kind of sound like that classic power corrupts kind of storyline, and that's always the fun thing to watch. So for number 2, I do want to talk about my favorite. I'm going to go ahead and call him a villain, because that's the way I use them at my table. Though, to be honest, Paizo's personification of this character is more nuanced, and you could kind of go misguided hero or villain. I just usually tend to land on the villain side, and that is Minkari, the golden dragon that is the ruler of Hermea, also known as the architect of the glorious endeavor. I kid you not, my table, we actually have our own song that we have recorded, well, we didn't record it, but we got a guy by the name of Dan the Bard to record a song about this dragon just because of how much fun we've had with it at our table. I'm not going to go into all of the details because there's a lot of his story that's in the very first 2nd edition adventure path, Age of Ashes. So if you want to get the full story, that's where you go.
I was about to ask, is this the same dragon I'm thinking of? Because I couldn't remember if this was him or not. Okay, I know about this guy then. I was trying to remember if this was the right one.
Minkari, the way he presents himself, he is the ruler of this island nation called Hermea, where he basically invites the best and brightest of humanity to come and be a part of his civilization. And he presents himself as like he is trying to build a better human civilization. He's trying to bring the best parts of humanity out. On the surface, it looks like this beautiful, clean, wonderful society, but around the edges, you get this very terrifying sense of almost like a George Orwell style Big Brother control that this dragon has put over his society. You know, like one of the teasers that you'll see in some of the products is, you know, the society looks so great, but don't ask questions about those weird charred bodies that washed up on the shore last week, that kind of thing. And I love that oppressive sense that they give to Hermea and to Minkari. And I will say this, the Age of Ashes adventure path is somewhat controversial in the 2E community. Some people really love it. Some people think that it was poorly developed. I will say this, it is worth the read for what Minkari is up to. If nothing else, I love what they did, and my group was excited to play that adventure path just because we had used Minkari several times in first edition, and when we found out he was showing up at the launch of 2E, we're like, oh, we're running that. So
that's always really cool to me, because I know gold dragons are typically your lawful good dragons also, so it's really cool that while keeping totally true to that lawful good nature, they've managed to twist this dragon into this evil being because he's keeping everything perfectly organized. It's just creating this terrible living dynamic. I think that's really cool. I started running Age of Ashes when it first released. My party sadly fell apart before we could complete it, but I had read through most of the things that happened with him involved, and I thought it was a very interesting story. It may not have been the best game to play through, but the story was pretty impressive, to be honest.
From what I understand, and from my experiences running it, the mechanical side of the game, they were still working out some rough patches, but the story, I think, was a ton of fun. My favorite memory from book 1 of that adventure path is, and sorry for anyone who's watching and didn't want spoilers, my bad, but the halfling that is threatening the goblins in book 1, one of my players was a sorcerer that had the it's the water push spell, hydraulic push, that's it. And they're standing down in the courtyard, and this halfling is threatening all the goblins, and the sorceress critical hits with the hydraulic push and just flings the halfling off the wall.
Jeez.
It was beautiful.
Alright, my number 2 is actually Amiri, the iconic barbarian. I honestly didn't know anything about her story. I just thought she had a very cool character art, and I saw her in the Kingmaker video game and just loved the way she acted, so I started looking into her. And her story is actually, it's honestly a little sad. She was born in the realm of the Mammoth Lords as a nomadic Kelid, and basically the tribe she came from believed women were only good for giving birth. They were not good for combat, they weren't good for gathering, anything like that. They were traded out to other tribes for resources or as marriages to secure alliances, but that's all. Well, Amiri didn't like that. She constantly pushed herself to be one of those good barbarians, basically, and always tried to be one of the best members of the tribe, and it made her tribe hate her. Her own brothers hated her for being better than her. Her sisters hated her for basically acting out because that would leave them to get punished. Well, when she finally came of age, her reputation had spread beyond their tribe, and the other tribes started mocking that tribe, saying, oh, you've got a woman who is the soft chieftain. Basically, she's the real chief and she's a woman, she's useless. Well, the tribe decided, okay, we can't deal with this any longer. We've got to get rid of Amiri. So they always knew she tried to one-up everybody. Well, they came up with the plan that they were going to launch a raid on a tribe of frost giants. So they go up this mountain, and one of the members of this adventuring party with Amiri wandered off at night and came back with a previously stashed frost giant dagger, talking about how they had killed this frost giant in single combat and they were the best. And as they expected, it goaded Amiri into trying to one-up him. So she claimed she would come back with an even better weapon. And as she stumbled off, they packed up and left. They went back home. Well, Amiri had wandered off into the bush, found a bastard sword, and took it as her own weapon. And when she returned to camp and saw that they had all left, she started trudging down the mountain after them, and she managed to get close enough to hear them laughing at her, talking about how by now she was probably in some giant stew. She was furious. She had this massive sword that she couldn't even lift, and here they are laughing at her, and in a rage, she slaughtered the adventuring party. After killing these men, she realized she could never go back to her tribe, and instead she just wandered into the wilderness and eventually made her way to Irison and the unknown lands that they didn't know about, and for the first time she was free as a woman. And it's such a sad story to me, just because her family didn't love her and her tribe hated her just because she was, I guess aggressive is the right word, but she didn't want to stand to just be some prize for some man, and I think that's admirable.
Yeah. But they did a good job with Amiri in Pathfinder Kingmaker, the video game.
Yeah, I loved her in that, which I've still not beat that game because I'm really bad about that, but the bits I did get to see of her, she's quickly one of my favorite iconic characters. And
I've not beaten Kingmaker either, but she is a standout in that game. I am assuming the storyline in that game is pretty true to the iconic story, but the way Alcat portrays her, phenomenally well done.
Yeah, I knew she was one of my favorites when I started playing that game, and I see her in the intro because I was like, oh yeah, Miri's in here, and before that I didn't even realize she was one of my favorites. So that kind of shows how you can start to like characters without even realize you're liking them now.
Amiri is top notch. I didn't put any iconics on my list. I like Sela from Wrath of the Righteous a little bit more, but I acknowledge that Amiri is top notch.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna touch on the iconics, to be honest, but I went on the wiki and was looking at different characters that I like, and my party group has always liked them just because when we started, we were new to role-playing games. We didn't know really anything about Pathfinder or anything like that, so we fleshed out the iconics pretty well, and because of that, they've always been a fan favorite. So, like, personally, my group really loves Mauricio and Kyra. That's kind of like their favorites. So we drop them in different adventures once in a while just for them to see them again. And I've always enjoyed the iconics, so I thought it might be nice to spread the knowledge on them a little. They're not just pictures you see in most of the adventures. There is a backstory for most of these characters.
I feel a little bad. I didn't know about the iconic characters. I just thought I didn't know Paizo had stories for them years ago, and so I didn't even know they were named. So, like, the version of Mauricio at our table is based entirely off of the artwork and not at all her story inside of Paizo. And I wish I'd known about the formal iconic stories back then, because honestly, my version was kind of cheesy. For my number one, and to set this up, on the rare occasion that I get to play, my favorite class is Wizard. That's my favorite role, and I naturally gravitate towards that, and most of my favorite characters that I've ever portrayed in a role-playing game were a wizard or a multi-class wizard in some fashion. So just in general, I like wizards. And Old Mage Jatimbe from the Golarion setting is such a wonderful take on not just a wizard, but also on the heroic version of a wizard. And then, for those who have watched my channel, you know that I don't usually use the term game master. I like to use the term storyteller. And Old Mage Jatimbe isn't just a heroic wizard, but he's also associated very heavily with the art of storytelling. So pretty much everything about his character is something I'm gonna love. The rough premise of his character is after Earthfall, when a lot of the nations in Golarion were shattered, he went around and he was on a mission to kind of collect all of the knowledge that had been lost as a result of that catastrophe. It's hard to pin down the lore on Old Mage Jatembe, because a lot of it is presented in like old folktale or old fable style, and how much of this is true and how much of this is not, that kind of question. But essentially, he gathers together these 10 warriors and they go out on all these different quests to kind of piece together as much knowledge as possible. One of the stories for him has a quote that I really love. Jatembe says at the end of one of his adventures, "I know now that a gem is not precious if it is hidden. I know that this knowledge is not just for me to hold." And that's kind of his philosophy in establishing the Magambaya Academy. Bravo, Paizo. I don't know who wrote that specifically, but bravo, I love it.
Yeah, I love that saying, because that's actually kind of like my creed for my videos, just because it doesn't matter if I know the lore, if only I know the lore. So I do my best to share it with everybody, just so if it can help even a few players, I've done my job. And that's basically what he thought. Like, I love Jatembe. He's one of my favorite characters, just because between him claiming the knowledge from the head of Yudursius, the god of the serpent folk, I think that's such a cool concept. He's a great character, and even now we don't even know if he's dead, to be honest.
Right.
And that's one of the things I love that Paizo's done, is they do not explain every mystery, and that is essential to a good breathing world. If you know everything, then there's no secrets left, and that's boring. If there's even secrets to the game masters and the storytellers, then you have something to create and make your own. And I think that is where Pathfinder excels.
They do a good job of giving you the hooks, but not telling you where the line is going to lead. And I think that is why Paizo is such a phenomenal setting design team, if you will. They understand the right amount of stuff to get the creative juices going, but then they give you the room to run to really make it your own.
Yeah, and they've got that on such different scales. Like, what I mean is, on one hand, you have the massive world-changing mystery that is the death of Eridan. But then on much smaller scales, you have, for example, there is a manor in Ustalav that I can think of off the top of my head that looks like a normal house. But when you enter the house, there's a giant egg in the center of the house that shakes every few hundred years. That's probably not going to be something world-changing, but it's confusing as all hell, and I want to know what the deal with that is. But they do so good about making it to where, it's not like life's mystery. Some of it's minute scale stuff. And I think that's a good way to do it. You need those different levels of mystery.
And speaking of levels of mystery, the reason that I think Jatembe is a fantastic example of, or why he deserves the #1 spot, one of Old Mage Jatembe's 10 warriors is the founder of the Shori Empire. They studied aeromancy with Old Mage Jatembe and went on to found the Shori Empire, which is its own gigantic story beat that Paizo has left wide open. And it's like, when you have an entire mystery empire subordinate to Old Mage Jatembe, that just sets the scale.
My #1 is another iconic, but it's not an iconic hero. It's actually an iconic villain, which I did not know was a thing until I was pulling information for this video together. There's a few of them I did not know about, so under the iconic villains, you've got 5 different iconic villains, and I just thought that was really cool because I'd never seen any of these. And Lazaro Dalvera was the one that caught my attention the most.
I will admit this is another character where you are going to be educating me on something I'm not previously familiar with.
So Lazarus started off as any child would. He was the son of an officer in the Malthuni army and a priest of Abadar. As a child, he was pushed into military school after military school, and he would fail out of military school after military school. He just wasn't tough and quick enough to be in the military. Well, eventually they shifted and put him into a priesthood of Abadar to see if maybe the divine arts was where his expertise laid. And he quickly became top of the class in the school of Abadar. Well, he would eventually go on to be one of the best Abadar priests for a while, but he had his fair share of bullies. To get back at them, he started to keep a journal of all their misdeeds and all of the times that they broke the laws of Abadar. Instead of turning them in because they were doing it wrong, he turned them in to basically punish them himself. So these students were expelled. Well, he basically started realizing that he enjoyed blackmailing people. And this kind of ties into my number 4, but eventually he would go on to go to a different temple. I'm trying to find the name of it real quick. In Setigny. I'm really bad with pronunciation, so I'm hoping that's right. But there, a woman named Lorith was the head priestess, and he wanted that position. So he started keeping track of her crimes. But her records were spotless. She was the perfect Abadar priest. And he was getting so frustrated because he could not move up in ranking in this temple. And then he started hearing this whisper in his ear telling him to just make things up, make up the lies. And he obeyed. He knew that if he did this, he could become the head priestess. And eventually he turned in these falsified records of all of her misdeeds, like illegal sailing and all this different stuff. And I believe she was imprisoned for it. It turns out when Lazaro took the role of head priest and began to pray to Abadar, thanking him for his help in becoming the head priest, it wasn't Abadar who answered. It was Asmodeus. So, realizing that the Temple of Abadar wasn't going to be his home, he fully went in on Asmodeus and left the temple entirely, and now travels around Cheliax basically as one of Asmodeus's head priests. And
nice.
It is such a gentle slope down for him that I think it's really fascinating, because the full story's quite a bit longer than that, but just the way it's so subtly done is the exact reason I love Asmodeus, and the reason that now Lazaro is one of my favorites.
I had not heard that story, but that is, I'll go ahead and say for like the 17th time this video, Paizo has amazing writers.
They really do, and like there's a little bits of like flavor in that story that makes it really cool, which I can't do justice for. I'm trying to summarize it, but if you get a chance, you should definitely read the blog post on him, because it is much better than what I was able to say.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that story. I have learned about a couple of new characters I didn't even know about today, so I appreciate that. I just know in general that it is so much fun to talk about Paizo's characters, because they do such a good job with them, pulling them from so many sources, and the heroes are good and the villains are good, and you're gonna have fun either way.
Oh yeah, the character stories is one of those things Paizo excels in, and I didn't know about Artix, and I didn't know all that much about Minkari, so those were really cool to learn about for myself. I knew of Nephas, but hadn't really Like, I didn't realize he was once just basically a mortal magician. I thought he was always a god. I didn't know that. That was really cool to learn. But thank you for your time. We're going to try to get together in the future to do a top 5 locations video, I believe it was, nations. We are going to try to get that out within the next month, hopefully. We just have to get our schedules lined up because jobs, kids, etc.
But I guess this is the point where we get to do a shout out to everyone watching this video. Who are your favorite characters from Golarion? Did you agree with our picks, or do you have someone that you enjoy more?
And is there anything about the characters we did touch on that we missed? Because you may make our numbers change. You could pull Asmodeus to my number 1 spot if you know a fact that I don't know about him. So yeah, let us know in the comments. There's all kinds of stuff about this we'd love to talk about, so let us know.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be on your channel, and like he said, here pretty soon, Sir Vertigo is hopefully going to be making an appearance on my channel as well, so keep your eyes open for that, and thank you so much. I enjoyed this.
Guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. This is my first attempt at a freeform talking video, so I really hope I did it well. I hope me and DTG kept you entertained, and I hope to see you next week, back here in the library.